In this podcast episode, we want to introduce you to our BCEN Friend Steven Malarchick. Come along as Michael Dexter and Hollye Briggs talk with Steven about his career in flight and nursing to becoming a living donor, which had him in the patient role and gaining new perspectives. Steven is setting a new standard for giving back. This episode is called Exponential Impact, from flight nurse to organ donation.
Hello, and welcome to the BCEN Friends podcast, where we hold interesting conversations about learning with a range of thought leaders, BCEN certification holders, and industry professionals. But most importantly, to create value and insight for you, our professional nurses across the emergency spectrum. We hope you find our discussions interesting, informative, sometimes funny, sometimes serious, and always valuable. I'm Hollye Briggs, a professional development specialist at BCEN, and one of your hosts for today. I'm joined by my co-host, Michael Dexter, Director of Professional Development at BCEN. Hi, Michael.
Hello, Hollye. Good to be with you today.
Great to have you. In this episode of BCEN and Friends, we have Steven Malarchick. Steven is a paramedic, emergency nurse, flight nurse practitioner doing some amazing work based in New Mexico and Colorado. Michael, could you please introduce us to our BCEN and Friends, Steven?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Steven Malarchick began his career in pre-hospital care as an EMT-basic and then progressed to a paramedic. His medic career included roles as the Regional EMS Coordinator for Colorado, as well as offshore work on a deep water drill ship and as Public Safety Director for the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. He became a nurse in 2003, starting in the emergency department and moving into flight. Steven continued his nursing education, becoming a family nurse practitioner in 2021, and continues to fly as a flight nurse practitioner. Steven enjoys teaching in all of its forms, which include online, classrooms, conference stages, and even on today's podcast. Steven, welcome to the BCEN and Friends podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks, Hollye. Thanks, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
Well, you have had a lot going on, and I know we just briefly skimmed the surface of it, but before we dive into some of the questions today, I wanted you to just tell us a little bit more about your nursing career.
Well, I would say I'm about a million miles from where I thought I would be when I was in high school. But right after I got out of high school, I took one of those American Red Cross first aid and CPR classes. And you know how, like, when you go into those classes, they say, hey, we're going to meet on Monday and Wednesday nights for the next 2 weeks, and the bathrooms are down the hallway. And does anyone have any questions? And then, I raised my hand and I say, are you going to teach us how to do the pen and the neck thing? And of course, they didn't. But, it took about another 7 years and I got to learn how to do the pen and the neck thing. But then I kind of progressed with my education, got in 2003, my nursing, like you mentioned, and got my BSN next, and then the master's in nursing education, and then finally my doctorate in nursing practice in 2021. So I feel like I've been going to school steady since 2003.
And have you put a pen in a neck?
It was funny. Well, not really funny, but it was interesting that I had said, this is the last skill I need to do. I'd said this about 7 years ago, and then I'm going to retire. And then I went and started my flight nurse practitioner job down in Artesia, New Mexico. And my first day, my first flight had a traumatic crike. And so, yes, I did it, and I couldn't retire because I just started. It was my first flight there.
Wow. Wow. Well, you've done a lot with flight over the last several years, and of course the flight nurse practitioner. But one of the things that you're also doing is item writing for the BCEN CFRN exam and maybe even the CTRN exam. But can you just tell us how you got involved with that and why you are staying involved with item writing and also exam construction review committee?
Yeah, I'm currently on the exam construction review committee, and I started as an item writer in about 2011, I think. At that time, I'd taken the CEN, I'd taken the CCRN. It was on paper then, and those are always nerve-wracking tests. But I really felt the CFRN was a little bit different, and it was because maybe it might have been because I'd been in education for a while. I really appreciated how the questions were wrote. They were pretty impressively written. And then I saw a request for item writers that came from the BCEN and put in my application, and they took me on. What I was really impressed with was kind of the training and mentorship program that came along with the item writing assignments. And I'm kind of a nerd about the science behind it and how much thought and effort and time goes into putting those tests together. It's very based on science, and there's a lot of thought into how those questions read, and that they're accurate, and that they're testing things that are pertinent to our practice.
Yeah, I didn't realize when I had already taken a few exams and then I started looking more into how they were constructed. I didn't realize the massive amount of work that goes behind every single item, whether it's through role delineation or whether it's through writing the item or reviewing the item or preparing it for placement on the exam. It's a lot of work, and I don't think people understand all of that process. So thanks for sharing that. And so when did you transition from item writing to the ECRC?
It was about 6 years ago. I think I've been on the ECRC for about 6 years. One thing that I'd mention too about certification testing is the program that I was in when I took the certification exam. There were CAMES, and so they needed to move to where everybody would take the exam. And I was impressed with how everybody stepped up their studying and talking about all of the flight medical issues and body of knowledge. And like I could just see people growing their knowledge exponentially, just getting ready for the exam. And I mean, to me, that's very worthwhile.
I agree with you very much, Stephen. I remember when I was studying for the CEN and even the TCRN, CPET, the studying for myself personally really helped me to grow just like my base of knowledge. And it's amazing how once you kind of assimilate something into your practice and you're like, okay, I understand this concept, I understand like the anatomy and physiology. It's not ironic, but I will say that it is almost expected that you will have that patient come across you on a shift. And it's like you learned, so now you're going to get a chance to apply it. And I loved that part of being able to feel like because I had studied, because I had learned, I was able to give better care and just be a better nurse at the bedside with patients. And I appreciated that. And to me, that wasn't really, I guess, my main goal of studying for certification or becoming certified. I guess I thought that might happen, but I didn't see it for what it was until I was in it doing it. And then I realized I'm so glad that I learned this stuff because this patient really needed it. And I was able to provide that. And so there's value to be seen on a lot of different levels. And I'm glad that you touched on that, just expanding your own knowledge, being responsible for your education and practice. That's our responsibility as professionals. So I love that. And I can tell you're very passionate about nursing education and teaching and just sharing your knowledge. And, what are some hard learned lessons and challenges that you've adapted to as the profession of nursing just continues to evolve? I mean, it's ever changing. That's one of the things that you love and both have to learn to adapt to. So what would you say are just some of those hard lessons and challenges that you could give us some advice on?
Well, I think, when you look at the education piece, there's been a pretty good sized shift in how people learn. I think people coming out of high school and college today learn differently than when I went through. Changing your learning style to be able to speak to them and be able to have them absorb the knowledge and skills is definitely different than it was 20 years ago. I think after COVID, it became a little bit more difficult to put people into clinical situations. And so that's been difficult because I think that's really the best place to learn is where you're with real patients, live patients. And I think we've lost some of that. There's definitely simulation, and simulation is very, very valuable, especially when you don't have that clinical component. But I mean, simulation is a little expensive, and it's difficult to provide in rural America, where they just don't have the big facilities to be able to provide that. So I think those are a lot of barriers and obstacles that have come up over the last several years.
So, Stephen, I'm going to totally shift gears on you because I could talk about education all day long, but you have an interesting story, and I think it's worth diving into for just a few minutes of how this whole story progressed. But you decided to become an organ donor, and can you just tell us what made you decide to become a living donor? What made you decide to donate your kidney, and just share a little bit about that story with us?
Sure. I guess it was kind of a series of very coincidental and fortunate events. One of my friends was on Facebook and put this joke there. I won't tell the joke, but somebody had responded to her post and said something about having a perm cath in her chest. And I was like, oh, who does my friend know that has a perm cath? That's kind of weird. And so I clicked on her link and went to her page, and she had this whole thing about, she'd gotten to the point where the nephrologist had said, ask friends and family if anyone would be interested in donating a kidney. And so I kind of talked to my friend about who this person was and looked through her Facebook profile and learned a little bit more about her. And, she had a child, she was young, she was going through dialysis. And basically the more I read, and then she had information on there about, the risks with live organ donation, and they didn't seem that bad. So I started going through the process, and because I knew I had the same blood type, but they put you through about 3 sets of tests that are kind of gradual as you go through it, and they only one person at a time can go through the testing. And I thought that was interesting. They will only let one person go through at a time. So I went through the testing, did several things, and then they came to me and they said, you're 100% match. And, so now you have to decide if you want to do it. And by that time, we'd done a lot of talking, and I was ready to do it, and the risks seemed minimal. And I had an extra kidney. I mean, I have 2. I had 2. And so we went ahead and did it. It was about 2 years ago. It's been 2 years here in May that we did that down in San Antonio. And she has lefty, and lefty's doing great. And I have righty, and righty's doing great too.
That is an amazing, very abridged, I'm sure, story of a decision that you made. I'm not even going to say on a whim, because I know you put a lot of thought into it, but just to click on a picture and on a post on social media, and it progressed to where you gave someone your left kidney. That is amazing. I mean, there's so many questions that I have. And I think just from being on the side of nursing, especially in the emergency room, we'll come in contact with those who are transplant, post-transplant patient, those who have donated, a living donor. But to be on the other side of that, to be patient during that entire process, I mean, I'm sure there are so many things that you were prepared for, and probably some that you weren't. But can you tell us, what is one of the biggest lessons you learned from your time being a patient during the process of organ donation? I'm sure you might even have more than one, but what would you say are some of the biggest takeaways that you had from your time as a patient?
I think it gave me a lot of empathy on being on that side, being a little bit more helpless and relying on people. I'd never, since I was a little child, had never spent a night in the hospital, never had surgery. So it was all new to me. And of course, being a nurse, I was super interested. I remember telling my nurse that was going to take care of me in the OR. She came into the pre-op, and I was like, hey, I'm a nurse, and I'm just super interested in this. Will you let me know what you're giving me? She's like, oh, sure. And so she's pushing this, syringe into my IV. She goes, this is Versed and fentanyl. And that's the last thing I remember. So I thought that was funny. But I guess, first thing I noticed when I woke up is my throat was sore. I'd only been intubated for, maybe 3 hours. And I can't imagine how people feel when they wake up after, being intubated for days or weeks. I think the whole thing really gave me some empathy. I found out you can actually have a 16 gauge IV in your hand. They started a 16 gauge in my hand. Afterwards, eating, I didn't think that would be such a big chore, but you definitely don't want to eat anything really dry like a biscuit after having abdominal surgery, because when you choke on it and no one's in the room, it really hurts to try and cough. So I learned that. But, I think really caring for people and trying to be empathetic to them is what I learned, or hopefully I was empathetic before that, but it really made me more aware of, trying to take care of people when they're having a really bad day. That person can make a big difference in that person's life.
Well, you set me up perfectly for the next question, because you obviously made a big difference in that person's life with your organ donation, and you talk about having empathy with others, but you've also had a pretty remarkable career yourself, and obviously there was people throughout your career and your life that have really impacted you. So, is there any particular moment in time you remember from your career, or any particular person that has really made a great impact on you as a person, as a clinician?
Yeah, when I was thinking about that question, it really takes me back to my first boss that hired me back in the early 90s. Her name's Claudia Applin, and she took a chance on me, which was awesome. But she was also an instructor, and she told me, you can change a lot of people's lives when you work in medicine, because, you're touching the patient every day and you can make a difference in their lives. But really, if you want to make like a huge difference in a lot of people's lives, you need to go into teaching. And that way every time you teach someone to do a skill or give them knowledge, they're going to go out and they're going to use that on other people. And then, maybe they'll teach and use it. So it becomes exponential, and so I really took that to heart and have stayed in education this whole time. And I tell people that all the time too, and try to share that with them. I would say Claudia made, a huge impact in my life.
That is awesome to hear, that just that little piece of advice and then it being lived out in front of you impacted you to the point where you've done for others what was done for you. And I think that's a huge part of just being a professional, but then also taking it to that next level where it's not just my profession, but it's something that I want to perpetuate in others who will follow after me, and really helping like that next generation of nurses come up and be strong in the profession that, we've chosen and we love to do. So I love to hear that. I always enjoy that question whenever we have a chance to hear from our podcast guests. It's always inspiring to me to hear about who's helped you get to the place where you are, because we all have those people, and I love to hear that. So thank you for sharing that with us. I do have a few rapid fire questions for you, just so we can get to know you a little bit better. But Steven, what would you be doing if you were not in your current role? So really anything that you would and if you couldn't be doing what you're doing now, flight nurse practitioner, if that wasn't it, what would you do?
Boy, anything that involved travel, anywhere, anytime. I love to travel. I think when I was a kid, I wanted to be a pilot. Don't tell any of the pilots that I work with that, but I did want to be a pilot, and really it was just because I wanted to travel. And some of the jobs that I've done over the years has been because I wanted to travel. Like I worked offshore. I thought I was going to get to travel overseas and work offshore, but I got to travel to New Orleans a lot. But I would definitely say anything that involved travel.
I like that question. And I also like your response. I am pretty much, I'm one of those people. I have about maybe 5 or 6 places that I still would like to travel, not just, in the US, but outside of that as well. And I mean, honestly, if somebody was like, "Hey, do you want to go here?" and it wasn't on my list, I'd still probably be like, "Yeah, that sounds good. Let's go." Especially if I'd never been there before. So I like to travel. I like all of the things that you get to learn while you're there. And really, it's mostly the unexpected things that you get to learn while you're there that made me want to travel more. So I'm with you on that one. I have a couple of favorites categories, actually. And, if you don't have one, we can skip to the next, but here we go. Your favorite TV show. It can be of all time, or it could be something that you're currently just really enjoying.
I would say there was a whole TV series called Chuck. I don't know if you remember that, but I really enjoyed that. I think I watched that TV series about 3 times. It's about a nerd that becomes a spy. So, yeah.
I have not seen that. I will have to put it in I'll probably have to Google it first and then figure out which streaming place it might be found on. So perfect. I always like a good recommendation. You never know when I'm going to run out of like things on my Netflix list. It'll happen one day. Okay. Favorite movie.
I mean, the first one that pops to my mind is Armageddon with Bruce Willis, and I think part of that is because I used to work offshore, and so that kind of all starts offshore. I've watched that several times. So,
honest to goodness, the part in the movie where, this is like spoiler alert. So if you haven't seen this movie, maybe mute this part of the podcast, but spoiler alert, where like he's talking to his daughter at the end and like, oh, that part in that movie, every time I get like teary eyed and I'm like, is it because I know it's coming? But every single time, no matter, and again, I've seen that movie multiple times and man, every time, it's
just an enjoyable movie to watch.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's got, like a little grit. It's got some action. It's got an asteroid. Like what else could you ask for? There's big music. Yeah. There's really
great music.
Well, speaking of that, what's your favorite musical artist? Again, it can be of all time. It can be something currently that you're listening to that you recommend for us.
I listen to all kinds of music. My standard joke is I listen to both kinds of music, country and Western, but really, really not. I've been to several Imagine Dragons concerts, and I've really enjoyed that. So I would say, if you haven't heard of Imagine Dragons, go ahead and give them a listen to.
Such a good recommendation. They really are a great band, and their music is kind of eclectic overall. So great recommendation. All right, moving on. This is a big question in my world. So what is your comfort food or a meal that you really enjoy?
I would say I like food in general. Food likes me, but I'm not scared to try anything. I've tried all different types of food, from different parts of the world. If I'm sick though, Campbell's cream of chicken soup. That's what my go-to is. Love mashed potatoes and gravy. That's comfort food too. So
I like it. Honestly, your overall answer, like just food in general, I like that. But I must say, I'm probably not as adventurous as you, and that's okay. I leave more of the adventurous food for those who are willing to take that on and who are not scared of textures. So good for you. All right. One of those final questions. Do you have any other hobbies or like something that you do really for self-care that's just kind of your go-to, something that helps you, just kind of find something a little bit outside of nursing that kind of just feeds your soul?
I guess I'd come back to traveling. I love to go new places. I actually like the process of traveling. So, whether it's an airplane flight and looking outside, or going through the airport and watching people, or even my commute to work. I have an hour and a half commute to work. And so I really try to make use of that time, whether it's listening to books or thinking or calling and talking to people. And beyond that, I live in a place in Southwest Colorado that has a lot of hiking and biking and outdoor type activities. And so try to get outside as much as possible to enjoy the sunshine.
Great pieces of advice. I must say that getting out, taking a walk, even in South Louisiana, where it's about to be 1,000 degrees before you know it in the summertime. But even then, just getting out, walking around for a little bit, seeing the sunlight, it really does have a way of just kind of grounding you back and giving you a little bit of perspective to help you, go on and make those good decisions. And I would agree. Anybody who has to commute, I'm always interested to hear how you spend that time. And I love, hearing like, oh, listening to some books. I do a podcast. I have some different things that I try to do during that time in the car, so that it's, sometimes it's just decompressing from a day, just turn on the radio. And so, yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, Steven. We appreciate it. If our audience would like to follow you online, what social media platforms are you on?
I guess you can find me on Facebook. I'm under my name, Steven Malarchick, and I think I'm also on Instagram. I may have had a LinkedIn account at one time, probably right after I did my MySpace account. So probably not good to link up with me there, because I don't think I've checked it in several years.
We will put some information out on our Podbean platform, where if you want to get in touch with Steven, you will have the ability to do that. So thank you for sharing that with us as well, Steven. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, don't look for Steven for his other kidney. He's holding on to that one. But
yeah, me and Righty are tight.
Exactly. I understand. Well, thank you for sharing your story about your live organ donation, and also about what you're doing for the flight community and your item writing. Just getting to know more about you was really nice. So, Steven, thank you for spending your time with us today. And it's been really wonderful. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you. I appreciate your guys' time, and this has been enjoyable. Thanks.
I want to take this time to thank Steven for joining us for this episode of BCEN Friends. Thank you, Steven, for sharing your knowledge, passion, and time with us. We're looking forward to spending some face-to-face time with Steven in Charlotte, North Carolina for BCEN Learn Live on November 13th through the 15th, 2023. Check out the registration information at bcn.org and come meet us in Charlotte. And to all of our listeners, we hope you will stay tuned as we continue with BCEN Friends and bring you new, meaningful content and perspective. If you have any suggestions for an episode, please email us at bcn@bcn.org. I'm Hollye Briggs, here with Michael Dexter, and on behalf of the entire BCEN team, we thank and celebrate you for all that you're doing as professional nurses across the emergency spectrum. Until next time, we are out.